Hello everybody and welcome to Gene's Reviews from a regular dude, where I do trailer reactions, I react to YouTube videos, I review YouTube channels. Basically, I just do whatever the hell I want. Hello everybody, how are you doing? 1970s fads that you might have forgot. So I grew up in the 1970s. I was in junior high school in the mid-70s. And I'm sure I'm going to recognize a lot of these. So let's check this out right now.
The 1970s were a fun and an occasionally bizarre time. Here we have a list of top 10 fads from that era. If you weren't born then, these might seem odd and hilarious. If you did live through the 1970s, these might bring back some amusing memories. Clackers.
I remember those.
Clackers were marketed as toys and were quite popular in the 1970s. They consisted of two plastic spheres suspended on a string that when swung up and down made contact with each other, thus making a clacking sound. Clackers were similar to a throwing weapon called bolas, used by South American gaucho cowboys. Sadly, the clacker fad died out rather quickly as a result of lawsuits and laws banning them. Why? The hard acrylic plastic balls would occasionally shatter upon striking each other, thereby causing shrapnel-type injuries to the users and surrounding bystanders.
Smacked my hands plenty of times using those. My arms.
MACRAME plant hangers.
I remember those.
The term macrame is used to describe a form of textile produced by applying knots to various forms of materials, such as hemp or jute, using knotting techniques. It can be used to make wall-hanging art, bracelets, clothes, window coverings, or virtually anything, limited only by the constraints of one's imagination. During the 1970s,
I'm sure they're still around.
Macrame became the go-to method for creating plant hangers. These things seemed to be everywhere, and in the most hideous colors the 1970s could offer. Of course, there were other uses for macrame during that time, such as these gems. By the end of the 1970s, the fad had run its course, and one could find all the macrame plant hangers they could ever want at garage sales in the 1980s. But as with any fad, one never knows when it could rush back into fashion.
I'm sure they're still out there.
Again, cradle spider plants in sunny corners. Streaking.
Yep.
Most people probably know what streaking is. But the mystery might be,
during the Academy Awards,
why would anybody want to run around in nude in a public place? Well, plenty of people in the 1970s took leave of their senses and did just that. In fact, some people even busted out their birthday suits at nationally televised events during that era, such as the World Series, the Academy Awards,
right there, yep, I remember that,
and the Montreal Olympics in 1976. There was even a novelty song about the fad called, you guessed it, The Streak, by Ray Stevens, that achieved the #1 position on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in May 1974. There are still some streaking incidences occurring these days, but not nearly as many as in the 1970s.
Most of it now is due to drugs.
Leisure suits. What the heck was a leisure suit? Well, it was a matching jacket and pants combination, usually consisting of polyester material, and was immensely popular in the 1970s. The style was created in 1970 by designer Jerry Rosengarten for Lee Jeans to market as business attire, of all things. What it became remembered for, though, was loud, tacky, garish, hideously colored clothing associated with the cocaine-fueled disco scene, slimy used car salesmen, and cheating spouses. For a few years, though, leisure suits were the bomb, often paired with gold medallions, sideburns, and a complete lack of manscaping and good taste. By the end of the decade, though, the suit had somehow gone from fad to joke, ultimately replaced by the power suits of the money-hungry 1980s. The leisure suit faded into the annals of bad fashion history, a non-biodegradable reminder of a swinging decade. The pet rock.
Guy made millions
lovable
off of
and
that.
Inanimate pet rock. For those who don't know what this was, Back in the 1970s, the Pet Rock was a collectible novelty product created by advertising executive Gary Dahl in 1975. He was joking around with friends one night in 1975 about what would make a perfect pet and came up with the idea that a rock would make a perfect pet. Gary got to work on the idea and wrote the Pet Rock Training Manual and marketed his idea at a trade show. From there, the media picked up the story, and after a few appearances on talk TV shows, Gary began marketing the Pet Rock and sold millions of them within a few months at $4 a piece. Gary then became a millionaire in a very short amount of time.
Yep.
It just goes to show you, with the right idea and some marketing mojo, mostly anything can be sold. Yes, the 1970s were indeed a strange time.
Gotta know what you're doing, I guess.
CB radio.
Breaker 19.
Breaker 19. Anybody got a copy?
I got a copy, driver. Come on.
You know what that was? It was the start of many conversations on a two-way radio that was immensely popular in the 1970s before the internet and smartphones. Motorists, and especially commercial truckers in the United States, used CB radios to converse with fellow motorists to discuss the whereabouts of service stations.
They still used them up in the 80s and 90s
the
too, because
location
I
of
drove
police
truck
speed
and they
traps,
still used them.
or just to converse in general. Many films from the 1970s showed characters
My
using
dad
CB
had
radios,
one the whole time he was
such
driving
as Smokey
truck.
and the Bandit, Breaker Breaker, and Convoy. Although still in use today, the CB radio fad died out in the late 70s, mostly due to overcrowded frequencies and the emergence of better communication methods.
Cell phones.
We still have the movies and songs that take us back to that special time, though. The Hustle Dance.
Yeah, I remember the CB radio driving with my dad in the truck, and I remember some of the lingo on there. Breaker 19, how about a 1036? Which meant, what time is it? My dad hated it when they did that. He said, time to buy a watch. But, yeah, he was on the radio all the time. Most of the time, my dad was only on the CB radio to mess with other people, to try and start fights and stuff over the radio.
The Hustle is a line dance and became an international dance craze in 1975, following Van McCoy's appropriately named song, The Hustle. It has some features in common with mambo, salsa, and swing dance. The dance became hugely popular in discos throughout the United States.
I remember that.
And was featured in the movie Saturday Night Fever. In the mid-1970s,
basically
it seemed that people were doing the hustle everywhere.
Like line dancing in the 80s and 90s.
Although its huge popularity faded quickly as the hype that was created by the movie died down, the hustle did not totally die, and has continued and takes on many forms, such as the Latin hustle and the LA hustle. It was the perfect dance to show off your platform shoes, permed afro hair, and tacky polyester clothes. Paper fortune teller.
I remember that in junior high school.
This one is a bit of an oddity, but was immensely popular with school kids in the 1970s. It was the paper fortune teller.
I remember in grade school.
It was a sort
even.
of do-it-yourself magic 8-ball device that you could make out of paper using an origami folding method. One would write possible answers to a question on the inside of the flaps, and then ask another person a question, for which the written answers might apply. The fortune teller would manipulate the flaps, and an answer to the question would appear, thereby telling the fortune. It was pretty cool, and seemed to be all the rage in schools in the 1970s. It died out though, as most fads do, and lives on these days mostly in the memories of middle-aged people.
I remember it.
8-track cassettes.
I remember that too.
8-track cassettes were mass-market music and audio storage media that caught on like wildfire back in the 1970s. The format was popular because it was compact for the time, and meant you could play pre-recorded music in a vehicle. There were some drawbacks.
You couldn't fast forward or anything.
The fidelity was limited, and there would be an annoying switch to a different track when a song was playing,
right in the middle
resulting
of
in
the
an
song.
interruption in the middle of a song. Nonetheless, 8-track players were ubiquitous in the 1970s, and were eventually replaced by another smaller tape format with slightly better fidelity and convenience, the cassette tape.
Yeah.
Zany local TV commercials.
They still have them.
Once upon a time, in the 1970s, Some advertising people in local markets took massive amounts of drugs and were put in charge of creating local market TV commercials for appliance stores, music stores, and car dealerships, among others. The result was a wave of bizarre, hilarious, weird, and sometimes frightening local TV commercials. Usually these featured a self-proclaimed crazy character pitchman whose prices were so low he must be insane.
To be honest, most of those commercials would make me not want to buy from that person because it makes me think they're not trustworthy.
Other times we got something like this.
We're here to ask Chevy owners if deals really do make the difference at Buff Whalen Chevrolet. Excuse me, madam, but I see you bought your car at Buff
Is this a TV commercial?
I know it sounds crazy, lady.
Crazy lady? Crazy lady pantyhose? I just bought some. I can't believe it. Let me tell
And
you
this
what
is just
I
plain
love.
flat out
I use them.
stupid.
I love them, and there are no tummy bulges, lady. You absolutely love them. Make sure you get
Buff Whalen Chevrolet, where deals do make the difference. Van Dyke near 18 Mile Road in Sterling Heights.
These may be mostly gone, but we still have Flo telling us what car insurance to buy. These weren't all the fads from the 1970s, but a nice sampling of things that are in the rearview mirror of the past.
I remember Doom Buggies.
Check back with this channel in 50 years, and we might be doing a summary of fads from the 2010s.
Well, that was kind of cool. We had a Doom Buggy. I remember my dad had a Doom Buggy he bought for my uncle, and we drove all the way from Denver to Utah. My dad drove it while I was sitting in the passenger side. I was probably in junior high school at the time, and it was in the winter time, and I remember freezing to death. It was so cold, but we drove that Doom Buggy all the way from Denver back to West Jordan, Utah. It was awful. I remember how cold that was. It was unbelievable. I was so miserable. Anyways, how about a joke? What do you call a superhero with a lisp that always works out? He's Thor. Thank you, everybody. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, hashtag Mean Gene, all that fun stuff. Check out my merch in the description down below. And check out the Shape. He's got some merch too, just like this one, my Shape hoodie. And I will see you next time.